Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social Podcast. Today we will be talking about the 6th round of the UCI World Cup, which took place in the Czech Republic in Tabor, and I am joined by Issam.
Hey everybody.
And Twan.
Hello.
So as said, we were in the Czech Republic today for the 6th round of the World Cup. We came here with Iserbyt as our leader. He had a big lead over his teammate Michael van Toerenhout in the overall. Issam, tell us what happened in the men's race there.
Yeah, indeed, it was in Tabor, the Czech Republic, and it was dry and fast, and that meant that it was all going to be peloton forming and a lot of big groups and tactical riding. Basically, for the first half of the race, we saw a very hard-working Lars van der Haar on the front of the peloton in a way, trying to make sure that there was going to be a selective group going into the further part of the race. Halfway in the race, we had the lead group of 6 riders with Van der Haar, Van Toerenhout, Iserbyt, Aerts and Van Kessel. Hermans in that 4th lap actually got a puncture. He was close to the pit zone, so he could actually change his bike, but on such a parcours it's very bad to have a puncture anyways. Zweek and Baestaens were behind that group of 6, which was now 5 because Hermans was actually dropped out of that group and Hermans rejoined behind them. In the end, all these 3 would rejoin back to the main group. Van Toerenhout was in the beginning or in the middle of the race giving a very good impression, maybe a little bit the best impression of them all, especially with those barriers. And he puts the pressure in lap 5, trying to use the barriers into his advantage. Only Aerts and Iserbyt are able to follow, but that attack results in nothing due to the fact that the pace is just very hard to keep it on a very high level, and everybody was kind of getting back with them in the end. Iserbyt tries to do it again in lap 6, also using those barriers. Van der Haar is the only one actually really able to follow, and he even counters that attack. The others start to struggle. The only one that really will be able to join these 2 in front will be Hermans, but also that will only be for briefly, because he in the end will also struggle with those 2 guys, and in the end will get that 3rd place. So then we had a battle for victory between Van der Haar and Iserbyt. Van der Haar was just the strongest today, was very strong, but Iserbyt under pressure for the last 2 laps, and it was just nothing he could do against it. Iserbyt had his moment on the barrier, came a little bit closer, but it was just not close enough, and in the end the strongest guy just won. The European champion of the moment, the current European champion, won from the former European champion in Tabor, and it was a 3rd place for Hermans.
A very strong ride by Lars van der Haar saw him take his first win in the World Cup since the World Cup in Hoogerheide 2017, 1757 days ago, so that's really a long time ago. That was good to see, but if we look at that race a bit, it was a tactical one, as you said, Issam. In the beginning of the race we saw Iserbyt staying behind a bit, but Iserbyt, they never gave Iserbyt the chance to take the initiative in the race. It was, for once, not Baestaens who was in charge of the race, it was more the Baloise Trek Lions. That was something that I noticed during the race.
I wouldn't even say it was Baloise Trek Lions. I think it was mainly Lars van der Haar that had the race under control from the start. He didn't let anybody have his moments. Normally, especially at such a race, you could see we would see a lot more tactical riding, because Hermans had Van Kessel, you had obviously the Baestaens guys with Van Toerenhout, even Zweek, but we couldn't really see that. Zweek had his moment that he tried to attack, but that was very fast countered by Hermans, and from that moment it was I just couldn't really see the tactical moments, and that was really due to the work for Van der Haar in the beginning of the race. And normally that is something that when you do such when you take such initiative, it can very fast backfire, especially on such a parcours, but Van der Haar was just the strongest. There was no one that was going to stop him today, and he was just flying, and the strongest guy really won.
Yeah, Van der Haar was extremely strong today, and I think Iserbyt played a really good race with positioning himself, but he just didn't have the legs today, and as you said, indeed, Lars van der Haar controlling the race really well. And I think also the Tormans helped a little bit with disrupting the Baestaens block.
About what Issam said, that it could backfire at some point, I thought that it almost backfired on Van der Haar. At some point he was dropped. We saw Hermans having a gap together with Iserbyt and Aerts, and Van der Haar was behind, but eventually he managed to close that gap and then took back the leading position in the race. So that was the only moment in the race I thought, oh, maybe Van der Haar went a bit too fast. But yeah, I mean, if we look at his tactics, the parcours itself, it's, in my opinion, a very nice parcours. You guys are free to give your opinion on that in a bit, but I really like the parcours, but it isn't the most difficult parcours in this time of the year. It's pretty fast, and sure, there's a bit of everything in terms of obstacles, but it's hard to create a gap, so Van Haar did the only thing he could do. He put Iserbyt under pressure for half of the race. Like, from the second half of the race, it was almost only Van Haar pushing, and eventually in the final lap that led to Iserbyt cracking, and that is eventually what made the difference, despite the fact that Lars van Haar needed to run the barriers because he didn't have the confidence to jump them after a crash in the pre-ride yesterday.
Yeah, I think that, the barriers played a role in a way. Obviously, I think that it could have played a bigger role if it was going to be more uphill in a way there, that they would have gone a little bit more straight, because now you have a lot of turns then, and you can get it back quite easily, a gap with if you have some technical abilities. But for sure, the barriers were very crucial in a way, and Van der Haar played it well, because in most of the time when he went to the barriers, he was the first guy, so he didn't really give them a lot of a bigger advantage. But if he was able to jump those barriers, I think the race might have been closed a little bit earlier, because he was just, the difference between him and the rest today was huge. It didn't show in the results, but it was huge, because he was able to push at points that I was like, well, the Iserbyt was there was nothing he could do, and I hope we can see a lot more moments like this, because it's not really fun to see only Paul winning, and hopefully now with also if Aerts can get up a little bit, we can have more battles and even battles in a way in the future.
Yeah, I think definitely it's good to see some competition, and not only Iserbyt wins as we saw in the beginning of the season. That's really nice to see. Of course, we had that one win of Toon Aerts and Gieten and of Quinten Hermans and Fayetteville. But for the rest, it was mainly Iserbyt who was in charge this season. Now, ever since the European Championships, it's been a bit less. So, yeah, I think that's good to see. Let's touch upon Quinten Hermans for a bit. He ended third here. He had a puncture. Do you guys think that without that puncture, he could have beaten Iserbyt or maybe even Lars van der Haar?
I think he was able to limit the damage of the puncture really well, and it may have cost him a little bit of energy. But I didn't really see the last few meters of Iserbyt, but I assume he was a little bit closer and just backed off toward the finish. And I think Hermans just didn't quite have it. Was really the third person in the race.
I would agree on that. I think Iserbyt, I mean, the difference in seconds between Iserbyt and Hermans is only 4, but Iserbyt, once he knew that he wasn't going to beat Van Haar, his head went down a bit and he gave up for fighting on the win. And then, he knew he had a comfortable margin over Hermans. So, yeah, I think Hermans eventually ends in the place that suits him the best in terms of result today. But another solid ride by Quinten Hermans. It's been a very solid season so far for him. Let's run down our entire top 10 then. We had, of course, that podium of Van der Haar, Iserbyt and Hermans. Then we saw Toon Aerts, who ended 4th. Not really a parcours for him, a bit too fast. Ahead of Michael van Toerenhout, who didn't look great today. Then we see a 6th place for the winner of yesterday in Leuven, Laurens Sweeck, ahead of Courtney Van Kessel. 8th place, Vincent Baestaens. And then we have 2 Italians who round off the top 10. It's Bertolini in 9th and Dorigoni in 10th. Let's first talk about Courtney Van Kessel in 7th. Twan, I heard you thought he put in a solid effort today.
Yeah, I think it was really nice to see him up there. Helped a little bit there as well when Quinten Hermans got his puncture. Was able to get to Van Toerenhout's wheel and make sure that the pace didn't go all the way up and that it would be slowed down a little bit. And it's just where you want him to be as Tormans to alleviate some of the tactical pressure that's there for Paul.
I think it's definitely an improvement for Van Kessel compared to earlier this season. He, of course, also had a very nasty crash at the European Championships. He was forced to retire from the race there. I think in Niel that was still affecting him. Today, 7th place, rode probably his best race of the season. And I think in a way, we can say the same for Vincent Baestaens. He crashed yesterday in Leuven and pulled out of the race. He still made the trip here to Tabor, ended 8th, and for 45 minutes of the race, Baestaens was hanging on, fighting for dear life to stay in touch with that front group, probably knowing that he would finish 8th. But I think this is another strong showing by Baestaens. I mean, sure, the result maybe isn't as good as his result that he got in the USA World Cups, but still 8th place for Vincent Baestaens, for Hermans. And both the team and the rider should be very happy with this, in my opinion.
Baestaens is having a great season, and to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if he got to go to Fayetteville as part of the selection of Belgium. He's just been very solid, and a race like this, it's just good to see where he is.
Well, then some other riders I would like to talk about. First of all, the Italians running off the top 10. Issam, this is good to see 2 Italians in the top 10 of a men World Cup. It's been quite a while since we've seen that.
It has been. Actually, I didn't really thought about that. That we don't really have a lot of Italian on the elite level being in the top 10, but it is indeed. It has been a while, and I think it's very great to see those 2 guys there. We know that they have some potential, and it's still early in the season, so we have to wait and see how things will play out. Obviously, one of the things that plays in this is it's a different parkour than we will have going into the end of November and also in December, because then the mud will play a bigger role and the races will be a little bit more tough. This was kind of more a criterium than anything else, but I think nevertheless very good results. It was not broadcasted very well, so we couldn't see a lot from them, but a solid result and a solid effort to be in 9th and 10th.
And I do want to say the same for David van der Poel. He does end outside of the top 10, losing the sprint for 10th place, but it's still by far the best result for him this season. I mean, sure, he's gotten some podiums in Spanish races, even a win there, and the 4th place in the GP Destil Iserbyt. But for the rest, I mean, in Bredene, 22nd, 17th in Gieten, 31st in Zonhoven, 28th in Overijse. It hasn't been great, but then an 11th place here, it really came by a surprise.
Yeah, it comes in a way with a surprise, but also in a way it's something he has in him. He is very good when it's a little bit faster. Obviously, he was focusing also a little bit more last year and this year on the road as well. He did a road campaign. He is from nature. He's a guy that can be very fast. There was even a time that his brother was telling that in the sprint when they were training together that that David van der Poel was just sometimes a little bit faster in the sprint. So he has the potential, especially on faster races, to be a little bit more in the front, and it's very good to see that he can do that on the main stage as a World Cup.
A final mention here would be on another rider who just missed out on the top 10, Jens Adams, 15th, but he was running well inside the top 10. I think he was in 9th together with Bertolini, and then he punctured, so very unfortunate for the privateer from the Hollebeek Hoeve team. I think he could have gotten another top 10 here, which would have also been a solid result. Jens Adams, just like Vincent Baestaens, having a very solid season. Let's focus on our women's race then. Twan, what happened in that race? Because that was a very eventful one.
It sure was. We had 3 women who took up most of the pacing, trying to thin out the peloton. As in the women's cross, we also had very much a peloton race. The names of the women pushing the pace were Capablanca Vash, Puck Pieterse and Lucinda Brandt, as they aimed to thin down the group. And eventually we would get down to a main pack of 7 women. Annemarie Worst, Denise Betsema, Celine Del Carmen Alvarado and Shirin van Anrooy joining them, and eventually I think Brandt noticed that it was going to be a very tactical race. It was very hard to create gaps, and she moved to the back of the group, leaving even Van Anrooy in front of her, which was a bit of a mistake, as Van Anrooy was the one that was yo-yoing off the back, really struggling to keep up all the time, but because the pace kept dropping, like in the start-finish straight and some other places, she was able to come back every time. But going into the final laps, it would be Puck Pieterse that really was able to utilize that jumping ability over the barriers to create a gap every single time. But she would go a little bit too early, and Betsema was able to close her down. And then into the final lap, we saw another Lucinda Brandt on the road attack to position herself well going into the field, and she would lead that lap the whole way home, putting on an immense show in that final lap, gapping everyone. and the others would do as much as they could, but they would be sprinting for second behind the world champion, and it was Pieterse that was able to beat out Alvarado and Wost for the podium.
Let's talk about that race. It was a very tactical one. I would first like to, well, actually not talk about Brandt, but about Pieterse, because she was in charge of this race for, I think, 75% of the race. I think Pieterse did a very good job. She knew she had the advantage on the barriers because she was the only one of the front group who was jumping them, and also jumping them with some style. It's not that it was slow, it was pretty fast, and we saw that it really paid off for her. Every lap she opened the gap there of around 5 seconds, and I think Pieterse, I mean, she knew that she had that advantage there and managed herself to be in front there lap after lap after lap. So yeah, I think that was very good to see that she was able to jump them and the way she did it, but perhaps there should have been some things that she should have done different in the race.
Yeah, I think going into them first and having the space to actually jump, or in second place, I think she did it a few times as well. It was very smart of her because she is able to use one of the biggest weapons on this course, which it's one of very few places that you can actually open up a gap. It's very hard to keep still, but if you press on, you will have the opportunity to do so. And I think maybe she tried it a lap too soon, which meant that Betsema was able to close it down comfortably, I would say, and it maybe cost her a bit too much energy.
Yeah, I think in a way it wasn't her plan to go all out, but she saw that Betsema was super slow in dismounting. I mean, Betsema was so slow that she also got past there, I think, or at least she was so slow that there was a massive gap opened. And then Pieterse was like, okay, well, if you're going to give me this much of an advantage, I need to try and capitalize on this. And eventually it was a bit too early. We saw that the tiredness kicked in the final lap, but I think in a way Pieterse is still only second year under 23. I mean, it's perhaps a bit of an inexperience there. We saw that Brandt did have the experience. We'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, I think Pieterse, maybe it will come with age. Like, she needs to be in this situation a couple of times, and then she will maybe realize that you don't need to do it every lap. You can wait and keep it behind. Just like Iserbyt in Niel, he didn't ride up that steep hill lap after lap. He waited. The others didn't count on it, and then in the final lap, bam, or it was the penultimate lap in Niel. But then he pulled out that card and opened a serious gap. So if Pieterse would have perhaps waited, then she could have perhaps surprised the others, and I think that's maybe something that can come with experience.
I think with experience and age, it's two things that at the moment she still really doesn't have. It is coming. And, you know, to be honest, with the barriers, it was really nice to see, because it was kind of the vibes that you have when Dani de Bie was doing the same thing in Pontchâteau with the World Championships, and nobody was able to jump the barriers, and she was the only one doing it and got a gap. She could have played it a little bit different for sure, but I think she was not riding for a win. She was riding for a podium, and in the end, she was very happy with that podium. I think should be her first podium in a World Cup. I'm not really sure.
No, she did podium in Overijse. That was her first World Cup.
But nevertheless, it was a very good result from her. And tactically, there were a lot of mistakes, in my opinion. I think Brandt got the victory, obviously from herself, but also kind of gifted. She was put in a position where, you know, she could play it the way she wanted to play, and I think they could have made it a little bit more difficult, especially how she placed herself midway through the race.
I think Brandt took a very big risk by doing that. She was at the front for, I think, 3 laps, second wheel, first wheel sometimes, then third, and then all of a sudden, like, she's like, okay, I've had enough, I'm sitting in the final wheel. But it was a very big risk to take, especially when Pieterse opened that gap. She was lucky that Vos buried herself and closed that gap, but Vos sacrificed her own result by doing that. She ended 6th in the end, but that could have ended very different if Vos hadn't done that.
But the thing is as well, Betsema closing a gap. Well, you know, for Betsema there was no point in closing the gap, because in the sprint she will, you know, not win, and we have seen it now that she only managed to get 5th. And Vos obviously has a very good sprint, in my opinion. I think tactically they should have tried to maybe say to her, like, okay, you know, it's not the time right now. You have to wait till the last 2 laps and then try something. Same for Pieterse, but that's obviously the experience as well as Vos. So, I think Wost and Alvarado were happy to stay in that group, and I think if they were a little bit better, they would have played it a little bit more tactically. But, in the end, Brandt was the strongest, and she was able to carry the victory home.
Indeed, like, Vos was maybe a bit too eager with the amount of time she pressed on the front. But I think one of her main mistakes is going into the final lap in 6th place. It's really hard to overtake and gain positions, and she just wasn't quite able to, and didn't have that like extra cushion of someone like dragging you back up when you get dropped a bit.
I think so as well, but overall I think Brandt took a risk, but it paid off. She was probably counting on others to do the work, and considering the rider she was with, that makes sense. I mean, we do all know that if Vos wouldn't have paced, probably Betsema would have paced after all. I mean, Betsema did it in the final lap as well. Betsema rode a very weird race in my opinion. She was really anonymous in the beginning of the race. In the second part of the race she came through, but then when we went into the final lap with a big group, I already thought she would end 5th. I even said it, she would end 5th, and in the end she does end 5th. She puts in effort at a very wrong moment if you're purely looking at result, and that doesn't work, and then eventually she blew up. Also very slow on the dismounts, both on the stairs and the barriers. Also slow to clip in her pedals after the stairs and the barriers. And especially here in Tabor, where you need to be quick on that, because there's usually a hill straight after the obstacle. It costs a lot of power, and that eventually broke Betsema today. But overall, I think for Betsema, form is dropping, and she did peak towards the European Championships, but considering all of this, I think she did peak a bit too early, because in Niel and then today in Tabor, it's not been what it was for Betsema this season.
Yeah, I agree on that she obviously is not in the shape she was in the beginning of the race, but I think this is not, especially in the state Tabor was today, very fast. It's never gonna be a race where she's gonna be, she could have been maybe on the podium, but she never would have won this race. And I think, especially if you're in a tight battle with Brandt for the World Cup standings, and you have so many women in your wheel, and you're gonna close a gap, I just can't really get it. It's tactically it's wrong. You have Brandt, who is equal with you on points. You have to play on Brandt. You're gonna be like, you are the favorites. You have to bring me back to Pieterse, and then from there we're gonna see what's gonna happen. But it seems like I was the only one with that idea in a way, but she didn't have that idea, and it's a bit of a shame, and hopefully she can bounce back from it. But I think if she's gonna be riding like this for the rest of the season with the World Cups and stuff, I don't think a lot of classified races are gonna be for her in a way at the end with the general classification.
I think it's very hard to say like Brandt you have to close it here, because like Brandt is 5 bikes back, I think. And like did you just give like an extra 3, 4, 5 seconds to Pieterse for little reason, And I think like in the state Tabor was in, indeed, it's just very hard to see her win, but you would at least like to see her place like a big attack, trying to drop as many people as possible and drag like a group of 3 clear instead of this group of 7.
I mean, the parcours is not perfect for her, but if we look at what she's done this season, Zonhoven was also a very rapid track, and she won there by a big margin. She was good in Iowa, where she ended 2nd, only behind a very, very good Marianne Vos. Bredene, probably the fastest race of the season, she also won. Of course, not everyone was there, but she still was ahead of people that we saw now. And don't forget, I mean, it's often forgotten that Betsema does have a very solid sprint. In the 2018 European Championships, she almost outsprinted Vos for the silver medal. So in a way, she could also gamble on her sprint for the 2nd place, because I think she could have also won that. Like, sure, Brandt was very good today. I don't think it would have been possible for Betsema to beat Brandt, but 5th place is not good enough, as Issam said, especially considering the classification. They were equal on points coming here. Betsema lost 19 points today, and that's about 2 wins. She needs to win twice from Brandt, and in the form Brandt is currently in, especially considering the downwards momentum Betsema has picked up, it's a bit hard to see that happen, especially in the near future. Although we have to say, next week in Kokzijde, it should be a very good parcours for Betsema. Let's look at our entire top 10. We had that win of Brandt ahead of Pieterse and Wost. Then we saw Alvarado ahead of Betsema and Vos. 7th place for Van Anrooy ahead of Van Empel and Van der Heijden, and 10th place went to Magali Rochette. Let's talk about 2 riders here in the top 10 who picked up some upwards momentum actually. Wost and Alvarado, I can definitely see improvement in these 2 riders' performances.
I do think they rode a bit of an anonymous race, but it's just good to see them there and that they don't get dropped. So I think they can be happy with today, and it's just another stepping stone toward the future.
I mean, it's good to see Wost and Alvarado pick up their performances again after having serious issues. For Alvarado, the story is somewhat unknown, but for Wost, we are kind of getting to know that the back was a big problem for her last season and this season. Very important, because if your back is blocked, you cannot deliver the power that you need to deliver. So it's good to see these riders improve in terms of results. I hope they will be at their best towards the December month and the championships. Issam, do you also think that these 2 riders will be good at the championships and compete for a podium or perhaps even a win?
I think Wost for sure. But about Alvarado, it's a bit of a question mark, especially if it's gonna be a little bit tougher. You know, it's gonna be very hard in my opinion. I think Wost at the moment shows a lot of potential. Was again a very strong ride. She didn't show herself at all in the race in my opinion, and then the last lap she was there. Maybe even a bit too late if she was in the wheel of Brandt, I don't know, but nevertheless it was a very strong last half part of the race, and I think of the lap of the race obviously. And I think for the World Championship is definitely gonna be that those 2 are gonna be favorites. You know, they're not having that palmarès that they have at such a young age already just because they have like one lucky year or something. You know, they are a consistent factor in cyclocross, and they will be for many years hopefully. And you know that just means that you always have to take them in consideration for a World Championship.
Let's focus on a group of riders who ended 10th, 11th and 12th. Rochette, Honsinger and Clauzel. All 3 riders had a bad start today. Rochette missed her pedal twice. Honsinger is just a slow starter, and I think Clauzel had some sort of issue as well. These riders, they rode as a group for almost the entire race, sprinted it out for 10th place eventually, but like, they rode a good race, and the result doesn't display the performance they put in, because if you had a bad start here today, it was nothing you could do anymore, because a group was very important. As Issam said earlier, it was kind of like a criterium today, so if you miss out on that group, it's kind of over for you. So then to still end at the back end of the top 10 is, in my opinion, still solid.
Yeah, it's especially the time gap. Like, they definitely... It could have gone like a few seconds a lap faster if they were just with that front group, if they immediately had that connection, but it's just a bit harder to have to produce that yourself. So in that way, a bad start is just very unfortunate because you're just not quite going to get to the slightly better people that you could have hung on to if you did have a good start.
Rochette overall was very happy with her race, and they eventually overtook Lechner and Frank, who were in the top 10 in the beginning of the race, but both exploded a bit and fell back. I'd also like to talk here on Yara Kastelein, who ended 17th. She also had a bad start, but that was because there was a crash in front of her, so she could do nothing about it. After that, her chain also blocked, and she needed to chase all the way from last place. Then to end 17th, it's not a shame either. She did even beat Aniek van Alphen from the 777 team, the old team of Kastelein. But in my opinion, Aniek van Alphen has been a bit disappointing throughout the last week. She had a very good start to her season. She looked to have made another step, but it's faded pretty quickly. She has not been getting the top 10s that we kind of expected from her.
Yeah, I was really hoping that Van Alphen would just be one of those riders that you would continuously see in the back end of the top 10. So this season it just hasn't quite made that, like, or kept that step. It's a bit disappointing because, like, for large parts of the season last year it was there what you'd hope to see from her, and now unfortunately it just isn't. Like 11th, 12th places, then an 18th, 19th. It's not quite what you were hoping for.
Indeed, she now barely ends in front of some promising under-23 riders. We saw Zemanova, Schreiber and Katie Close and 20th, 21st and 22nd. About Close, we already mentioned her in the Neil podcast, so we won't go into her performance that much today. But I do like to talk here about Zemanova and Schreiber, because to end in the back end of a of the top 20 of a World Cup is, in my opinion, a solid result. Like in the men's race, we often see these under 23 riders come in the top 10, but these two are first year under 23 riders, 20th and 21st, with almost all the top riders here. I think this is something they can move forward from. I'm excited to see what they can do in the future.
I mean, in the men's U23 riders that finish like in the top 10, I think those are also like the older ones usually, and like them being first year U23, they're not quite there yet. But these are just very good results, very good for them to see as well, that they can still get some nice racing in.
Yeah, it's definitely good to see. And if we look further, I think especially the first year under 23 now is pretty strong, because we see Millie Cousins in 24th, and later on in the result we also find Olivia Onesti 26th. So I think it's really exciting to see these young riders already being up there in these World Cups, and like in general a lot of young riders racing these World Cups. So yeah, I'm pretty excited what the future brings, because we've already seen Pieterse providing us with some great technique, and in the future I think we'll see great battles with her and then the likes of Van Anrooy and Van Empel and Vash. So I'm looking forward to the future.
And a lot of different nations as well in this first year under 23s.
That is also great to see. I think we have been provided with some good racing in the men's and women's race. I will also briefly mention the results of the youth races here. Men's under 23 race was won by Mees Hendricks. He was leading the race for quite a while with Anton Ferdinand, but Ferdinand had a crash in the last lap and ended 4th. The second place then went to Rijenkamp, and a friend of the show, Cameron Mason, ended 3rd. It was a pretty eventful race, some riders having quite bad days like Thibaut Nys, others having punctures like Wietse Meeuwse, riders having good days like Roulier and Jente Michels, who also had a puncture. So it was a quite eventful one. Shame it wasn't broadcasted. If we look to the races even early on the day, the men's juniors race was won by David Haverdings in front of Nathan Smith, who rides for our own Cyclocross Garden Shed team. And first year Jordi Corses ended 3rd, the Belgian. That was also a pretty eventful race, big groups there. The women's junior race was a lot less interesting. We saw Zoe Bakstedt taking the win ahead of Leonie Bentveld. Bentveld got dropped around the halfway point of the race. Behind that we saw the Italian Venturelli, who was only a first year and 3rd. She just beat the home favorite Hadlikova from the Czech Republic. Well, with that said, we've covered it for Tabor. Twan and Issam, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for hosting.
This week we will be uploading more podcasts. On Wednesday we have an interview coming out with Australian cyclocross rider Heinrich Hausler. He will tell us about why he does cyclocross, what he loves about it, and what he is looking to do for the rest of this season. So make sure to tune in. If you didn't listen to yesterday's podcast, that is about the ETIAS Cross in Leuven. We spoke with Anneke and Felipe Orts about their races there, so make sure to listen to that as well. Thank you guys for listening to this episode, and I will catch you guys later. Goodbye.